Have you ever thought about buying a crash damaged car, fixing it, and then trying to sell it on for a profit? Well, I have, and I've done it 10 times. So in this video, we're gonna have a chat with car rebuilding professionals, other YouTubers doing the same thing, and also take a look at my past builds to help answer the question, is rebuilding crash damaged cars financially worth it? There's something about heading over to a salvage auction website and looking through all the listings full of badly damaged cars. Some are better than others, but all the damaged cars on sites like these are likely to be sold for a massive discount due to their condition and write-off titles. So you'd think there's huge potential to get your dream car for well below the showroom price or make yourself a tidy profit. But it's not always that simple. Buying cars from these salvage sites can be a bit of a gamble and repairs can be really costly.
And if you're not careful, you can end up losing thousands.
So the first place we're going to go is a professional body shop which specialises in fixing customers' crash damaged cars. But whilst we're on the way there, let's talk about the car which has made me the most money, but by the end of the video you're going to find out which is the car I've made the biggest loss on. And trust me, I've lost a lot. This is my Mark 8 Golf R which I bought from a private seller on eBay for £25,000, and some of you who watched the rebuild thought this was a bit expensive, but there was a sweetener in this deal, and that's because with the purchase price of the car I got included a complete front end, meaning to rebuild this car and put it back on the road, all I had to buy was an airbag kit and a rad pack. So with that taken into account, I spent £5,000 modifying and fixing this car, meaning that the total spend on my Mark 8 Golf R was £30,000. Now thanks to you guys, I managed to raffle this car which returned me £35,000, which is roughly the cost of an unmodified second-hand one, meaning that I profited £5,000 on this build. So we're now here at Darkside. As I said earlier, these guys are the professionals when it comes to doing this sort of thing. Big man.
How are you, mate?
This is Daz, you might recognise him from Calvin's channel, and he is currently repairing my BMW M3, which we're going to look at just now. So we're trying to find out whether rebuilding cars in this day and age is worth it as a business model. So do you think, knowing what you know with all your experience, it's feasible to make money as a business rebuilding cars properly?
Yeah, 100%.
And do you think the sort of car that you buy dictates how much you're going to be spending not only on parts, but whether you're going to make money on it or not?
Yeah, obviously trying to find second-hand parts. So you start going to dealer and buying bits, and then the profit starts dropping.
Yeah. This is the problem I've found, especially with performance cars. Even things down to headlights can be different, body panels can be made out of different materials and things like that. So do you think if you were to do it as a business, it would be better off buying cheaper?
Cheaper, I'd say.
Buy the cheaper car.
Yeah.
So lastly, if anyone wanted to still get into rebuilding crash damaged cars to make money, what tips would you give them to make them the most successful?
See, it's a bit hard sometimes buying co-parts and that stuff like that. Sometimes you can't go and see them, so you're bidding line. Check your gaps, your lines, check your back panel, and then just check for your edges on the door edges where it's been, say the quarter's been done or something like that.
So if you're saying that when you're buying a car, if you're getting into it, avoid co-part because you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, they'll rob you for it.
I know. Right, Daz, I'm going to leave you to finish off the M3, but let's go find out how much money I've lost on other cars. Cheers, Daz.
No problem.
So the next car, which didn't do too badly, was the Aston Martin V8 Vantage. The channel was a bit smaller when I did this build, so a lot of you might not have watched this one. But the car went from a completely original V8 Vantage with front-end damage to a restored version with a genuine V12 body kit fitted, wrapped in Miami blue. In total, on the purchase price, the repairs, and the mods, I spent £28,000 on this car. I then went on to sell this car for £27,000, which would mean that I'd make about £1,000 loss, but because I had some leftover body panels and spares to sell on, it actually means I just about broke even, or maybe even made a slight profit. But now, what about my E92 M3 project, which we're still finishing up? Now, I bought this car with front-end damage and a Category S title from Copart for £10,000. This car, being an individual colour and a competition pack, means I probably could have got between £15,000 and £18,000 for it if I'd have put it back to standard. But if you've been watching, you guys know that this car has not been left standard. I've fitted a supercharger kit, M4 brakes, seats, and loads more, meaning the total price that I've paid on top of the purchase price is another 10 grand getting it to this point. But I've still got a bit more to go. So let's assume the end spend on this car is £23,000. I may just about break even to the right buyer, or I may lose a few thousand. Now, there is 3 cars on the channel which all share something in common. The BMW 135i, the Audi TTS and the Nissan 350Z. Now, what they share in common is that each of those cars has lost me about £2,000, meaning that over the 3 builds, that's a total loss of £6,000.
So I'm coming to you for business advice then?
I'm good at business. The 135i went from the cheapest example available in the country to a 1M replica with 500 horsepower. The 350Z was the highest mileage example available in the country at the time with over 200,000 miles, and I did this to it. And the Audi TTS went from a crashed, stolen and fire damaged car found by the police to a fully restored, facelifted and modified version wrapped in satin blue. Which one did you like best, Finn? Back to the studio. Now, you might be noticing a bit of a pattern here. I'm losing a fair bit of money on each of my builds, but let's go and find out from another YouTuber if they're having the same problem or if I'm just bad at my job. Matthew.
Hi.
Right, we're doing a video on the feasibility of running a salvage repair business and making money without the YouTube side of things. So I want to know what your thoughts are on how feasible it would be in this day and age to buy, repair and sell crash damaged cars and be able to make a comfortable living from it, and whether you think that's possible.
I think people are doing it, but it's definitely got harder. I think supercars, maybe not so much. Supercars would be harder than cheaper cars, maybe.
Do you think what you've done on YouTube, along with other people rebuilding cars on YouTube, has then increased the price of crashed cars, making it even harder to do that?
I think more people, believe they can do it themselves, which there's nothing wrong with, but also they took away the inspection as well, didn't they? Do you know, like before, you used to have to rebuild a car, then it has to be inspected by the DVLA before it could be feasible to be put back on the road. Now they've got rid of it, and all it needs is an MOT test. And as you know, on MOT tests, they don't go around checking if every airbag's there or anything like that. They just check the lights are out, which opens it up to cut corners massively for people. So actually, before buying a crash damaged car, you wouldn't have been so scared to buy a crash damaged car before because it had to pass an inspection. Now it doesn't. Only an MOT test, which don't test the safety aspects of the car, which is serious.
Thanks, Jamie. Serious. So one final question for you. When you're buying a used car, to help the people out at home, if you had 3 car buyers' tips for buying a used or salvage car, what would they be?
First off, you want to try and find out as much of the history of the car as possible. Secondly, I think bringing a mechanic with you to check the car. I don't know why that's funny. Bringing a mechanic, trying to look around the car, test driving the car. If they don't let you test drive it, I think it's a bit of a...
How do you test drive a crash damaged car?
Yeah, she makes a fair point.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. For a crash damage one, I'll be obviously looking at what's damaged. Also checking parts first before you buy it is a good idea. Checking on eBay. And then also when you get there, good idea is plugging in a device to check fault codes or anything that might be misleading.
So Matt makes a great point there. When you're buying a car, it's really easy to check the fault codes on it to make sure that what you're buying isn't hiding any secrets. And it could not be much easier with OBD11. All you've got to do is take the device out the box, stick it into the car's OBD2 port, turn on the ignition and fire up the app. Then we can hit connect and it's going to detect what sort of car that we're working on. So now we can scan the car for fault codes and it's going to look over 28 modules on this car to see how many faults are stored. There's probably going to be a few on this. 67. More than I thought it'd be. So what have we got? We've got one for the fuel rail pressure sensor on the engine, a few for the airbags, a few for the parking assist, the body electronics. I've got a lot to pick, so I'm not, yeah, there's a lot. But you can quite easily clear the fault codes and see what comes back to see if they're stored from the previous faults on the car, which you may or may not have fixed. But OBD11 can do so much more than that because you can activate individual features on your car using their one-touch application feature. So on my X3M, for example, there's all sorts of things we can do. We can have it so the navigation is displayed in a heads-up display. We can turn on something called Scandinavian DRLs, which means that the rear lights stay on with the front DRLs. We can turn off seatbelt warnings and even make it so the horn sounds when you lock the car. Oh, I like this one, default driving mode. So with this car, for example, when you start it, its default mode is going into eco. So we can check changed that, so when you get into the car, straight away, it's in a more sporty mode. So let's go into sport, because we don't want to go too mad as soon as we get in. So with the touch of a button, we can activate that application, and that means as soon as it's created a backup, flash the new software, that we should, every time we start the car, be in sport mode. Done. Let's make sure it works. Right, please join me. Let's go for a start. So we can see on the dash here, we have the engine in sport, the suspension in sport, and the steering wheel in sport on the first start, which means this is now a sports car. So if you want to grab yourself an OBD11 device to take control of your car in terms of diagnostics and coding, make sure to use the link in the description and discount code SLIX to save yourself some money. Thank you to OBD11 for sponsoring this video. Going back to my builds now, this is my wide-body Hyundai i30N. Now, I bought this car from a salvage auction for £7,900 and it had front, side, and rear end damage. Now, after all of the repairing and modifying, I've spent about £18,000 building the UK's second wide-body i30N. Now, this is the most modified car I've ever owned, and a lot of the mods, like the body kit, are irreversible. Now, in most cases, modifying a car will probably devalue it, but in some cases, with the right buyer, it might just increase it. That's because if, for example, you were set on getting a wide-body i30N, you'd be much better off buying mine, which is already done, than going out yourself, buying the car, the body kit, and getting it done yourself. Now moving on to my BMW X3M. This build has been one of the most challenging ones I've ever attempted, but I am so close to finishing. Now the paintwork, the cost of the professional repairs, and the lack of availability on second-hand parts has made this BMW the most expensive build I've ever done to date. Now a good X3M second-hand probably goes for about 45 grand, and with everything I've spent on this car, I'm probably about at that mark already. Now I don't want to think too hard about how much I've spent on this car, but let's not forget that knowledge is very valuable, and I think we've all learned something from this build. And how about my V8 manual Audi R8? As many of you know, I took this off Mark McCann's hands after he ragged it around his field, stripped it apart, and then left it in a pretty bad state. I bought this car off Mark for £26,000, which is exactly what he paid for it, and then spent about £2,500 restoring it back to factory fresh. After the build, that car sold for £28,000, which is about 10 grand more than what We Buy Any Car offered, which means that I roughly broke even. Now, before we get on to our next professional, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you like seeing idiots like me rebuild cars that they really don't know how to do. So hopefully one day I can rebuild one of these. Now let's see what someone with more professional experience thinks to this topic.
Hello, mate.
Dean!
How are we doing?
Good, mate. Are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
In essence, I am currently recording a video revolving around the topic of buying, rebuilding and selling crash cars for a profit as a viable business model without the need for YouTube. Because I think you've got a bit more experience kind of doing this and actually earning money from it without necessarily the need for the views, without the sponsors, that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, so obviously I used to do this before YouTube as well, so it's something that just kind of grew into YouTube as I was doing it. When buying cars off Copart and stuff, there's always loads of things to take into consideration, like how much you're paying for the car, how much you think you can sell it for as a cap car, how much you think you're going to repair the car for, and that usually gives you like a maximum amount to bid on the car. Once you actually get the car, it's a complete gamble. The best you can do is as much homework as possible, and then just hope for the best, really.
Yeah. So, in your experience, what sort of car do you find is the best for making profit, rather than getting views necessarily?
I guess labour-intensive jobs, because my labour is essentially free. Things that maybe you don't need to spend too much money on, but take a lot of time, like an engine rebuild, for example. What
sort of car do you think would be the most profitable to rebuild, and why? I don't mean necessarily brand, but I mean kind of style of car. So if you'd be kind of doing city runarounds or luxury cars, sports cars, that sort of thing, which sort of those cars do you think would be the most profitable, and why?
The first thing to spring to mind is like your bread and butter cars, which is what everyone says. They fly out the door and it's their money maker. They just do volume instead of profit. So they're probably the best ones to do, because you might be able to sell them a lot easier. If your Golfs, your A3s, or you just cars like that are like maybe cat ends, so minor damage that should only be a couple of panels to replace and get back on the road.
What do you think is the biggest mistake you've made, or biggest financial mistake you've made when rebuilding a car? I
don't know. I don't actually know if I've made a massive one, touch wood, yet.
You're a lucky man.
You could call it luck, or you could call it good planning and research.
So far, you've been well prepared. That's how we'll put it.
Yeah, you can say that, yeah, I
Well,
suppose.
there's actually a car which I need to go on to, which is going to go in this video after this, which is a car you nearly bought, and I tell you what, you'll be glad you didn't. So I need to go talk to these guys about that, and I'll thank you for your time. The Jaguar F-Type SVR. I lost thousands on this car. I picked this limited edition Jaguar up for £27,500. So after all of the videos rebuilding this car, I was about £44,000 deep in it by the end, but that is where the problem started. Now, hopefully you saw the video where myself, Matt, Nico and Matt's dad all went across Europe, and the first stop was at the Nürburgring, which didn't go well for me. We let Misha have a go in the car, and on the third or fourth corner, not sure what happened, but it stripped the supercharger belt and then took out a vacuum line for the brakes as well, meaning I had reduced power and next to no brakes. And that alone cost me £1,000 to repair because Nürburgring tax. Then the next problem on that trip is once I'd got the car back and we were in Italy, we were at a hotel where we got the cars nicely cleaned up for the rest of our trip, where the hotel concierge decided to nicely curb my wheels and take chunks out of my tyres, which I never got reimbursed for. Nice. And that definitely decreased the value of the car. And then the final nail in the coffin is something that you guys haven't even heard about, because on the way back from this trip, driving through Europe at a hotel one morning, we had a large amount of smoke pouring out the back of the car on cold starts. And when we got home, we sent this off to be diagnosed, and it turns out on a 20,000 mile Jaguar, it was the head gasket, JLR. Now, because the build videos were done on this car and the project was over, I didn't want to drag out doing this again, and I wanted to keep the channel moving forward and move on to the next project, which means I wanted to get rid of it realistically as quickly as I could. So that means selling it with the head gasket gone. Luckily, the garage which diagnosed the fault were interested in buying it, and, well, they paid 36 grand for it, which means I lost £9,000. Business. Now, the purpose of this video is not to put people off rebuilding crash damaged cars. It's quite the opposite. There's nothing more rewarding than rebuilding a car, understanding every single inch of it, and increasing your skill set along the way. So I want to encourage all of you to give it a go if you are interested, but it does come with its own risks, and I'm trying to be as transparent as possible with you guys. Now, obviously, this is not how I make money. I'm making a consistent loss on the cars, putting these back on the road, and doing the crazy stuff that I do with them. The only way that what I do is possible is thanks to you guys who are watching at home, and I can't thank you enough for that, because not only are we saving some cool cars, building some interesting things, helping each other learn along the way, but you're also enabling me to live out my dream job. So thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and I will catch you next time.